coffee is changing at an alarming rate, and now we have specialty instant coffee, a thing that seemed impossible and perhaps still is considered impossible by some. There are three, I think, to choose from out there, and it seems sensible to go and get all three, brew them up, and taste them side by side. First, under three, we have Sudden Coffee. Now, this was probably the first instant specialty coffee to appear in the market, started by a guy called Kala. A little disclaimer, I did do some experiments with Kala before he started Sudden on instant coffee using specialty that Square Mile had roasted. So I know a little bit about instant, but not all that much. More recently, we've had Swift Cup appear on the scene. A little bit different in style of packaging, a few more options available. Sudden just does the one blend, whereas Swift Cup do a few different things. And then the most recent entrant into the market, just launched, is Voila. And again, they're doing something a little bit different, which is working with lots of different roasters to offer lots of different coffees. So, three different styles, three different approaches. Now, in assessing these, there's going to be two different things to assess. There's going to be the coffee itself that was turned to instant, that was brewed and then freeze-dried, I suspect, in most cases. This means some of my preference may come down to whether I like the coffee in the way that it was initially roasted in the first place. Then there is the brewing and freeze-drying process to turn it into instant coffee. How good a job has been done there? So that's something that very much is in the control of each of these different manufacturers. So all of them recommend the same kind of portion control, about 1 sachet to about 8 ounces of water, so that's what I'm going to do. I am using filtered water, but in theory, you shouldn't have to, right? Water chemistry is very important for brewing coffee because it's going to affect what gets extracted. Here, we're dealing with an extract. That work is already done. So as long as the water is neutral tasting, it shouldn't really impact the way the coffee tastes too much. So I have London tap water, but it has been filtered down a little bit. You could say I should be doing this as a blind test, but I've drunk each of these before. I think I can quite easily recognize them. Again, there's some pretty different styles going on. There's an Ethiopian coffee here, there's a blend here and here, so that might make them very obvious and very easy to pick out. You're going to have to accept that this isn't a blind test, but I will do my best to be fair to all parties. I have no financial interest in any of these. I'm just curious which I would pack and take with me on holiday or traveling or all those times when, you compromise on the coffee you drink. I'm going to taste and see which ones I prefer. So here we are, ready to taste. And again, I should stress, these are quite different. Again, we have a blend here from Sudden. We have a seasonal blend here from Swift. And in this case with Voila, it is a Ethiopian coffee called Chena from Upper Left Roasters. This does have taste notes on the packet, which they describe as jasmine, dark chocolate, and honey. Now, looking at them before we brewed them, they looked very similar. All of them show kind of crystallization that you might expect from being freeze-dried. The Voila looked much lighter in color, though that isn't necessarily reflected in how the coffee itself looks. Actually, Sudden's coffee looks the lightest, and Voila looks the darkest. They're a little bit hot right now, so let's have maybe a little smell, see what we can smell. Now, one of the challenges with soluble coffee, with instant coffee, is aroma. And none of these really have a particularly strong aroma. Not hugely surprising, it's incredibly difficult to keep aromatic, volatile compounds in brews like this. Grinding coffee drives them away, brewing them has an impact too. Capturing these very delicate, flighty little flavors is incredibly hard, and none of these smell particularly aromatic. None of them smell in any way unpleasant. They just don't have that kind of heady, fresh cup of coffee smell to them. Now, these are too hot to taste, so I'm going to have to leave them just a little bit longer to cool down to really have a good idea of what's going on. And now, while we're waiting for these to cool, it's actually probably worth noticing how they look quite different. Now, one thing I've noticed with Sudden from the beginning, actually, is that after you've brewed it, as it sits there, you have this weird kind of circulating churning effect, as if there's a few pieces of undissolved or, I don't know, particles of coffee just kind of floating around and churning around in the brew. The Swift Cup actually has a little foam on top, which is interesting, quite surprising. None of the other two do, and in fact the Voila just looks like a cup of brewed coffee. So it says to me there's some quite different technologies and approaches, either in brewing or in freeze drying, between these three. Time to start tasting. Let's start with the Sudden. Now, I've subscribed to Sudden for quite a long time, and it's always had quite a distinctive Sudden-y kind of taste. It tastes like a pretty light roast, and to be honest, it does taste a little bit under-extracted. It can taste just a little bit dry, just a little bit thin. It's not a notably sweet cup of coffee. It's not necessarily a damning criticism. It's much, much better than most other instant coffees you can drink. It's sort of fine. I wish it was just a little less dry in the cup. There's acidity there. Not too much, not overwhelming, but, you know, I think it could do with a bit more balancing. So if you like super light roasts, if you like that kind of zingy, tartar, lighter thing, this may be more up your street. On to the Swift Cup. Now again, Swift Cup do a bunch of different coffees. They do single estate stuff or single origin stuff. This is their blend, so I would presume it to be a bit more balanced. And it is. It's relatively sweet. Mouthfeel is pretty pleasant. It's not particularly dry. It's quite a charming cup of coffee, really. It's certainly not comparable to the best fresh brewed coffee out there, but it's pretty good. Now let's have a taste of the Voila. This tastes probably the closest to brewed coffee. This has very little in the way of kind of instant coffee flavor artifacts going on there. It has set me up with some interesting expectations. It's an Ethiopian coffee. It looked pretty light as the sort of soluble powder, but actually not a ton of acidity. There's a sort of medium body going on. There's not a ton of aromatics here either. It's not a particularly Ethiopian-y cup of coffee, but it is, again, it is very pleasant. I think that both probably the Voila and the Mainstay benefit a little bit from the way that they're packaged in foil-lined sealed things. The little plastic test tubes, I don't know if they're entirely, truly airtight. I've seen moisture condense in them before. I think they're not quite as good a packaging as the other two for a product like this where you want maximum convenience. It's also substantially larger than the other two, even though it contains a similar amount or a similar dose of soluble coffee. As these start to cool, it is interesting to go back to them. Tasting the Sudden again, there is a little bit more what I would call kind of origin characteristic in there. There's definitely Ethiopian coffee in here, and you can taste it. It has those kind of aromatics going on, those kind of slightly peachy, slightly citrus kind of aromatics and flavors. Which is the best instant coffee? Now, for me, I remain probably the most impressed with Voila and with Swift Cup. These two are doing a pretty good job. The coffees that I've tasted from Swift Cup that have been from different origins have had good origin characteristics. I think there's something particularly impressive about the technical side of Voila and what they're doing. I'm not sure what that is, but I am impressed. Sudden is interesting, and I think Sudden has paved the way for others, but I do want a sweeter cup of coffee, and I would like something packaged a little bit differently. Prices are below each coffee on screen. Especially instant is not cheap, and it's not going to be cheap for a good long while. Perhaps it should never be cheap. It certainly should be convenient, and frankly, all of these are better than what I might have drunk at 6 a.m. in an airport or at a train station or camping or in a friend or relative's house if they're not really into coffee. These are all pretty good shortcuts to prevent you having to drink something pretty disgusting because you need the caffeine. The final decision. I think if you are looking for convenience, any of these will do. If you're looking for an instant coffee that has some good origin characteristics, then I would recommend Swift Cup. If you're looking for an instant coffee that's the closest to filter coffee, then I'd probably recommend Voila. There is no perfect cup here. I don't think any one of these really stands out that far ahead of the others. I think Sudden is interesting for its origin characteristics, but it's not my favorite cup of coffee, and I'd like it to be a little bit sweeter, either on how it's roasted or how it's been extracted and turned into instant. But overall, super interesting and actually bodes well for the future. I think technology is going to make this more and more possible, and perhaps while the industry is fascinated with pods, the future might not be in capsules, it might be in instant coffee. So that is it from me today. Thank you for watching. Love to know your thoughts down below in the comments. If you have tasted these, let me know what you think about them. I'd be interested to hear. If there's something I've missed, if there's a new little instant coffee startup out there that I haven't seen, let me know. Thanks to all of you who subscribe, who follow this channel. It is appreciated. Have a good day.